All right, let's dive into one of the most transformative, action-packed, and honestly, kind of chaotic periods in all of American history, APUSH Period 7, which covers the years 1890 all the way to 1945. So, first things first, why should you care? Well, this 55-year stretch isn't just some side story. It makes up a huge chunk of your AP exam. We're talking 10 to 17%. So, yeah, getting a handle on this period is absolutely crucial.
And the story of this era? It is just staggering. Think about it. This is how the United States goes from being a nation mostly focused on its own continent to becoming the world's undisputed atomic armed superpower. It's a total identity shift in just over half a century. So to make sense of it all, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll look at how America became an empire, how the progressives took on the Gilded Age, the whole era of war and prosperity, and then the massive crises of the Depression and World War II. Then we'll wrap it up with the big takeaways you'll need for that exam. Okay, our first slice of history is all about America becoming an empire. And this story really kicks off right around 1890, when the American West is officially declared closed. With that continental frontier gone, the nation's leaders started looking for new frontiers and, new markets across the seas. But this was not some easy decision. The very idea of America, a former colony, remember, becoming an imperial power itself, that sparked a really fierce national debate about what the country's identity was and what its role in the world should even be. On one side, you had the imperialists. They argued that America's booming factories desperately needed new markets, or the whole economy might just collapse. They were inspired by theories about sea power and this sense of duty they actually called the white man's burden. But on the other side, you had anti-imperialists, people like Mark Twain and Andrew Carnegie, who said that building an empire completely betrayed American ideals and risked dragging the U.S. into those entangling alliances that George Washington warned about. And this whole debate just blew up in 1898. The explosion of the USS Maine in Havana, which was totally sensationalized by what they called yellow journalism, pushed the U.S. into war with Spain. It was a splendid little war, as one person called it, short and decisive. But wow, the consequences were enormous. The U.S. got an overseas empire basically overnight, but that led directly to a really brutal war in the Philippines, where Filipinos fought for the independence they thought America had promised them. Now, at the exact same time the U.S. was expanding overseas, a powerful reform movement was turning its attention inward. This was the Progressive Era, and it was a direct response to all the massive problems created by the Gilded Age. That period of crazy industrial growth that looked all shiny on the outside, but was just rotten with corruption underneath. I mean, look at what the progressives were up against. You had these giant corporate monopolies called trusts that controlled whole industries. Corrupt political machines ran the cities, and for regular people, life often meant dangerous factories, terrible urban poverty, and the total destruction of the environment. It was a mess. So what was the main weapon the progressives used? Exposure. Muckrakers, basically America's first great investigative journalist, they shocked the nation into demanding change. Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, exposed such disgusting conditions in meatpacking plants that it led directly to new federal food safety laws. And Ida Tarbell's takedown of Standard Oil, that fueled the whole movement to break up monopolies. To fight all that political corruption, the progressives figured the answer was more democracy, not less. They pushed for big reforms like the initiative, the referendum, and the recall, all of which were designed to get around corrupt politicians and put power right back into the hands of the voters. Okay, in our next slice, we see how the nation, right after all of this reform at home, gets pulled into a massive global conflict, World War I. And this war would just dramatically expand the power of the federal government. It was then followed by a decade of wild prosperity that really was just hiding some deep cultural divisions. After 3 years of trying really hard to stay neutral, a perfect storm of events just dragged the United States into the war in 1917. You had Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare, the country's deep economic ties to the Allies, and then the shocking Zimmermann telegram, which was a German plot to get Mexico to attack the U.S. It just became impossible to stay out. And how President Wilson framed the war was absolutely key. He sold it to the American people not as some fight for territory or revenge, but as this grand moral crusade. It was a fight to make the world safe for democracy. But that crusade for democracy abroad came with a really steep price here at home.
The government passed the Espionage and Sedition Acts, which basically crushed free speech. I mean, you could be thrown in jail just for criticizing the war. This led to the Supreme Court's clear and present danger idea, which said rights can be limited in wartime. And it fueled this intense anti-communist panic called the First Red Scare. All that post-war anxiety, mixed with a big surge in nativism, this idea of favoring native-born people over immigrants, it led to a total reversal of America's immigration policy. The National Origins Act of 1924 pretty much slammed the door shut. It created this quota system that was specifically designed to cut way back on immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, and that basically ended a long, long era of open borders. So the economic boom of the Roaring '20s, it came to a spectacular end, leading right into the Great Depression. This crisis would completely reshape the role of American government just before the country had to face its biggest global test ever, World War II. I mean, the sheer scale of the collapse was something nobody had ever seen. The Great Depression was an economic catastrophe, plain and simple. At its absolute worst, in 1933, a staggering 1 out of every 4 American workers was unemployed. Franklin Roosevelt's response, the New Deal, was a complete game changer. It was built on the 3 R's. Relief programs gave people immediate jobs. Recovery was about restarting the economy. But maybe the most important part was reform. Programs like the FDIC and Social Security that created a permanent government safety net. This was a massive expansion of that old progressive idea that the government had a duty to step in and solve big problems. And just as the New Deal was really getting going, the world plunged into World War II. For African Americans, this war was a 2-front battle. The Double V campaign captured this idea perfectly, fighting for victory against fascism overseas, while at the same time fighting for victory against racism and segregation right here at home. But the war also brought about one of the most shameful violations of civil liberties in all of American history. Fueled by wartime panic and racism, Executive Order 9066 led to the forced removal and imprisonment of over 110,000 Japanese Americans. And get this, most of them were U.S. citizens, from their homes on the West Coast. Okay, so after this incredible 55-year roller coaster ride from a regional power to a global superpower, what are the biggest themes? What are the essential points you absolutely have to nail for the AP exam? Let's just break it down. First, the U.S. became an imperial power, which sparked a huge debate about its role in the world. Second, the progressives redefined government as a tool to fix social and economic problems. Third, the 2 world wars massively grew the power of the federal government. Fourth, the Great Depression and the New Deal created the modern social safety net we have today. And finally, all of this leads to 1945, with the U.S. as the undisputed top power in the world. Those 5 points, that's the heart of Period 7. And this brings us to the central question of the entire era, and a final thought for you. As the United States stepped onto the world stage as a superpower, how did it balance its founding ideals of liberty and self-determination with the hard realities of its own immense global power? That's a question that would define the rest of the 20th century.